Welcome back to the Fantasy Formula, and it's time to gear up for our second triple header of the year and get your fantasy teams ready for Imola. Zach, you and I had a wild ride in Miami with our Limitless chips, but in the end, we survived it.
Yeah, it was mayhem on the live stream last weekend. But we stuck with the Limitless and it ended up working okay. I can't say it was crazy good because if you played no negative, both of them kind of worked hand in hand doing good. But basically, if you played a chip last weekend, you did good. I can't say the same if you didn't though, however. But yeah, we're living life at the minute. It's going good and we're slowly climbing up the ranks.
Yeah, so at this point now, Zach, Terry, and I are all in the top 10,000 in the global league, which is great news. We can breathe a sigh of relief for the rest of the year. But before we move on from that, our producer Greg tells me that Terry has sent us a special note because he is in P1 out of the three of us. So let's see what he has to say. So it looks like Terry's pretty proud of himself. He's up to nearly the top 2K in the global league, and it looks like he's a Star Wars fan too. So I don't know if it's my turn for a Darth Vader character arc or his, but I think things are going to get dark in the next few weeks between one of us. So we'll see how it unfolds.
Oh god, he's too smug. He's too smug in the photo. Don't worry, we're gonna catch up. And with my team value sitting at 112.2, I'm looking forward to when I can reap those rewards.
Now, before we dive in for this week's race, make sure you like and subscribe because that's made a huge difference to our channel throughout the year, and we really appreciate it. Now, let's get into the very first topic of the week. It's the biggest news since we last went racing in Miami, and that is the driver swap between Franco Colapinto and Jack Doohan. Now, Doohan leaves us after 6 races and a total of negative 14 fantasy points, so a pretty underwhelming start to Jack's career. But 6 races still feels a little hasty, so we'll see how Franco Colapinto adapts to the car, but I think it's only a matter of time before he starts to endear himself to the grid like he did in 2024.
Yeah, and I mean the big question on everyone's minds is what's he gonna come in on? And for me, I think it's going to be mean if it's not 4.5 because you're going to have teams out there who just have enough transfer to keep an instant swap to Doohan to Colapinto if it's 4.5 to 4.5. And if you put it any higher, then you're doing them an injustice. And it's one of those things where we as the player should not be treated unfairly because of F1 Fantasy's sort of obscure free race average, which has come to this point where a lot of people at 4.5. Because if it was last season, I mean, even still this season, points-wise, and just for being in an Alpine, Colapinto probably should be valued around 6-ish million, but it's just going to be incredibly unfair if he does get that 6 million. For me, it has to be swap for swap, 4.5 million per Colapinto in.
Now, I feel pretty good about this because if we look at the recent history of driver swaps, that's exactly what I predict is going to happen. If you think back to earlier this season, Tsunoda and Lawson, they swapped prices 1-for-1. When Franco joined the grid last season in place of Logan Sargent at Williams, they swapped prices. And in 2023, AlphaTauri went from Nick DeVries to Daniel Ricciardo to Liam Lawson, all at the same price of the outgoing driver. So I think F1 Fantasy does want to make it fair so that you don't have to make a second swap to afford a driver just because someone on your team's been dropped. And I just want to go through some quick math here. If he comes onto the grid at 4.5 million and he needs a 1.2 million points per million ratio to get that max price increase of 0.6 million, he only needs 6 points this week. So I think he's going to be one of the most popular budget drivers on the grid, especially because at 4.5 million, he can't lose any value. So a lot of good potential for Colapinto this week. We'll see how it pans out. Now, as optimistic as I am about Franco this week, I do want to give you a word of warning. Remember, he started out really hot in 2024, but he got a bit wild in the end. He had 3 DNFs in his last 4 races, and he racked up a lot of damage in the free practice and qualifying sessions along the way, so he might have some bumps in the road in the first few weeks. So we'll need him at 4.5 million, because any DNFs, we don't want to lose any more value from them.
So moving along to our tier list, and wow, it changes so much every race weekend, and it's because of just how chaotic it was in Miami. I mean, I'll start with the A tiers because that keeps pretty simple. And Norris, he goes back into the buy section because budget-wise, he only needs 19 to get that 0.3 million. Piastri, he's been doing brilliant. Again, only needs negative 9 points to go up 0.3 million. He's been smashing it. I realistically think he should be in everyone's team, no matter the circumstance for anything else. And then you have the big three of McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari again. McLaren, it's always going to be there. Again, very safe getting that 0.3 million and the best 4-point scoring basically each weekend. And then Ferrari, it's still there for you can use them. However, definitely it looks like more McLaren Mercedes are back into our heads. Potentially Red Bull. That's why they're on the fence if the likes of Verstappen can put it on pole, because then they could bring extra points. But A-tier wise, it looks pretty set in stone that this is what you want.
Yeah, I totally agree. And in the case of Lando Norris, we moved him up a little bit from the fence back into the buy just because it's a little bit more likely that he can get that maximum price increase. He only needs 19 points in Imola to achieve that. So Lando's a bit more on the buy side, but of course, we prefer his teammate Piastri because he's cheaper and he's had a higher upside through the first 6 races of the season. Meanwhile, that constructor of McLaren, how good are they right now? They need negative 89 points for the maximum price gain of 0.3 million. So, of course, we're going to run them this week. But if you're looking for that differential, because so many teams are running Mercedes right now, Red Bull could be good at any given week, especially considering how strong Max Verstappen is in the rain. Ferrari have been strong with their pit stops, and hopefully it was just an aberration in Miami last week, and they'll come back up through the field as they start bringing some upgrades in the next few weeks as well. So presenting a few options because all of these teams could gain value as the weeks go on.
And then you look over to our B tier, especially on the buy side, and it's a lot less. I mean, it's definitely on the fence as well. We can fit them all in this time. But it really is very slim pickings around who you can bring in B tier driver wise. And it's weird to say, but even on the buy section, half of these drivers, if it was any other race weekend, I would sort of be like, stay clear of them, because Albon's one that interests me the most, because Albon needs around 6 points to get 0.2 million, which isn't a lot. But at a track like Imola, still be wary of someone like that. And I will give a little sneak peek. That's why I still prefer Stroll, because it's going to be hard to score points around Imola. And you kind of just want the safe option where Stroll's at 1 point. But I will say that is still 10 times better than anyone in the sell option. And then, of course, you have Bortoletto, can't go down in value. We're expecting Franco Colapinto to be at 4.5 million, can't go down. However, as he doesn't have a DNF to his name, he should still be good, even if he starts around 5 to 6 million to bring in. Hulkenberg, similar. He looks not great for price increases, still 5 points to 10 points. However, it's -1 for the 0.2 negative. So on that side, it's good. And then Hadjar being Hadjar, 7 and 12. I don't think he'll hit it, but again, another -0.2 is better than -0.6, which is what we're trying to basically miss this weekend.
Our tier B has shaken up so much since Miami because we had 7 DNFs from 7 different constructors. So with the exception of Hadjar, we had a lot of buys become sells and sells become buys. Lance Stroll at the top of the list, like Zach mentioned a moment ago, because he had 25 points in Miami and needs the fewest to gain the most in F1 Fantasy this week. I want to look at the constructors a little bit in Tier B because so many teams have run Haas as a cost cap building constructor, but I'm starting to get nervous about them now. They need 19 points for a 0.6 million increase, but they've only done that twice this year. And I think a lot of that is because of Behrman's DNF in Miami. That's increased the requirement to get that price increase. So I'd sit back on Haas for this week. Things also got worse for VCarb. They need 24 and Alpine need 26. So a lot of these midfield constructors are going to be a little bit harder pressed to get price gains this week. So I would avoid the 3 most typical in that class. But that does leave Williams as an interesting option here because they need 0 points for the max price increase. And with 2 veterans at a circuit that is low DNF, sometimes is prone to rain, I would be okay with Williams if you're a little bit desperate for budget because that opens up more money to run on the top of your team. But I don't think I'd advise anyone past Williams.
And then one other constructor I'm not too keen on, but technically it is the safest option B tier constructor would be Sauber, because they're at 4.5 million. They've hit that minimum threshold, so they physically cannot go down. And for the first time in a while, it's the first B tier constructor, the only B tier constructor, that is still in the negative for getting that 0.6 million increase. So again, it's one of those things where Sauber at -2 compared to Williams at 0. I think Williams is still the clear winner, but maybe if you can't afford to have that Williams, if you're still going for that budget gaining sort of area on your team, then you could look around to Sauber.
Now, just to double click on some of the cost cap building options for this week, we had a lot of devastation in Miami, like we mentioned a moment ago. So let's dive into some of the drivers that we think are the best options for this week for those teams that want to build cost cap. We have a lot of doable targets here that can get point 0.2 million pretty easily. Stroll only needs 1 point, Hulkenberg needs 5, Albon needs 6, and Hadjar needs 7. So just a couple of midfield overtakes or position gained, and you can get at least point 0.2 million out of that.
Yeah, it's one of those weekends where don't expect a lot of budget building. It's very much going to be get to the drivers who either get minus zero point 0.2 or plus zero point 0.2, and then call it a day. It's going to be a weird one.
And when we look at two of the top options here in Albon and Stroll, I'm not quite sure where to lean on them. In the case of Albon, he's the P7 fantasy scorer. He has 5 out of 6 weeks with 10 plus points scored. So he's coming into this race really strong. Meanwhile, in the case of Stroll, he has 3 straight top 10 finishes at Imola. He's the P8 fantasy scorer on the season, so he's coming in hot. But also, these were two of the top DNF drivers in 2024. So they are a bit overdue to have some bad luck. There might be some regression on one of them this week. So it's going to be a little bit of good luck or bad luck on which one we pick and which one succeeds.
And just to reiterate on the Albon sort of thing, because he does need 6 points in Imola, I think this is going to be very similar to the Japan situation where no one can really overtake in Imola. And in Japan, Albon managed to get 8 points, and that's just over what he needs. And bear in mind, if you remember back to Japan, Albon had a good race. He was in the points. He qualified in the top 10, got points. So it's one of those weekends where I do really think it's just look at the number, which number's lower, you put them in your team sort of thing.
And on this list, one driver I'd fade a little bit is Nico Hulkenberg. When you look at his scoring week to week, he put up 20 points in a wet opener at Albert Park. And then in the sprint at Miami last time out, he posted 11 points. But that's just him gaining positions from a lot of drivers that DNF'd in front of him. Otherwise, he hasn't cleared 3 points all season. So like Zach mentioned a moment ago, this is a low overtake circuit. I think he's going to be hard-pressed to get to that points threshold that he needs. So I'm looking at maybe a high and low option with either Albon and Stroll at the top, and then probably Franco Colapinto if he comes in at 4.5 million as the cheaper driver for that. And so just to fast forward a week to Monaco, what are some options that could emerge if we keep building our prices in the right way? The first one that stands out to me is a pairing of Oscar Piastri and Yuki Tsunoda. In the case of Yuki, he had a DNF at Jeddah that's going to fall off of his 3 race average by Monaco, and his 33 points scored in Miami are going to make it really easy for him to gain that maximum 0.6 million in value. So I'm looking at a Piastri Tsunoda lineup. But Zach, you've been looking with this higher budget of yours at a team that could have Piastri and Kimi Antonelli, and that could be really huge.
I'm very excited about this. And it is one of those things where this is where we're going to start seeing the budget very much coming back to help us throughout the rest of the season. Because I know at the minute it's around 114.3 million to get the cheapest Piastri Antonelli team into your team selection. However, especially around tracks like Imola where we're going to have low scoring and at Monaco again, we're going to be having a lot of B-tier drivers who are resetting from their DNS from Miami, emerging from Monaco around 4.5 million to 5 million. If it carries on this way, we'll have Alonso, Lawson, Bortoleto, potentially Colapinto, all below 5 million, which means that the Kimi Antonelli and Piastri teams actually might be cheaper by the time we get to it. So just keep your eyes open for this, because I do think we are getting extremely close, and I think we'll start seeing the first people using this team in Monaco, and then a lot of people using it from Canada onwards.
I haven't had a chance to drop my Kimi Antonelli trivia for this week because I know a lot of us are hoping that he loses some value this week, but this is a home race for him, so there could be a little extra motivation to succeed. And also, the last time a Pope was selected, the very next Grand Prix was won by a driver named Kimi. So we've got some things going for him this week. Maybe he will gain value and prove us wrong, but if he doesn't, this lineup's looking good in the future races.
Now, heading into Imola, it was one of the big talking points that people could be using Limitless heading into this race weekend if you hadn't used it in Jeddah or Miami. But for most of the people playing F1 Fantasy, it's a no-go now. If you had the likes of Alonso, Behrman, Doohan, Lawson, all in your team, they are definitely getting minus 0.6 million in budget coming into this race weekend, and that will affect your team too much Limitless-wise. So most likely you're going to have to push it back to a Monaco, or maybe then you'd have to really wait until a Spa. However, I would say if you didn't have a lot of DNFs in your team and you actually got away with it quite luckily, bear in mind, don't be put off from the Limitless if you see your budget building isn't going too crazy different, because everyone this race weekend isn't going to be getting big budgets. So it's all relative to this race weekend. So just keep that in mind. If you haven't had DNFs, Limitless is still on the cards, but that's a very slim amount of people.
And it's funny you mentioned that, Zach. We say we wouldn't use the Limitless unless you were this guy. This is a lineup sent to us by our listener, Jason, and a very interesting scenario here. This is a player in his league that hasn't changed their lineup since Australia, and yet they have over 109 million in budget. They're one of the top teams in the world right now, level with some of us in the top 10,000 in terms of points, and they haven't changed their team all season. So what an incredible stroke of luck. But we showed them here because they're only on one DNF in Miami. It was a piece of that Behrman DNF for the Haas constructor. So if you have a team like this, I'd be happy to use Limitless. Only one DNF means a lot of these assets are probably going to rise. You've got a piece of Stroll and Albon, two of our biggest gainers for the week. So some people might still use Limitless. And if you have this team, I definitely recommend it.
Yeah, I'm so surprised of how this worked out. There's always someone who's had like just some crazy luck. I'm not even gonna call it luck. It was a good call at the start of the season, but to have the balls to keep it carrying on for the whole 6 races we've had, I have to commend it.
So for those of us that haven't had such good fortune heading into this week, which lineups are the best that we recommend for Imola? Now, this first team we dubbed Old Faithful because it's Piastri, McLaren, and Mercedes, along with the best budget building options for the week. There are flavors of this lineup that you could have for really any budget from the low to mid 100s all the way up to 110 million, depending on how you play those midfield drivers. So there's something for everyone here.
Yeah, it's there's so many variations you can go with now, and like you did just mention earlier, because when we're at an awkward stage where everyone who's got budget over 110 million is looking good in the next few race weekends for big teams. However, we're still at that point where we've got plenty of budget to throw around, and that means that everyone who has less budget can still use these teams. So if you don't have enough for Albon, easily enough to go down to Stroll, and they're both as good as each other. And then if you want to potentially go Stroll Hulkenberg, because there's a potential more chance for a bit of increase in budget if Hulkenberg does work out, you can do that sort of thing. I think the main thing you're going to see in a lot of these teams is if Colapinto does come in around 4.5 million, and I would say anything still below 5.5 million, he becomes a great asset just because he hasn't got any DNF to his names.
Yeah, I would dub Colapinto a must own for everybody, and I'm probably the most popular budget driver of the week.
So for anyone still struggling a bit on budget and coming into a normal race weekend, this is still a good play. I mean, hey, Williams, if they continue their form from Miami, they would look very good on points, so you wouldn't actually struggle too much on the points difference. But it's just bringing in those big names. Of course, Piastri and McLaren, the two real safe ones, alongside Franco Colapinto. And then Bortoletto can't lose any value. And Albon and Stroll, both realistically, I think the best ones that aren't 4.5 million in a team, mixed with Williams. Again, it looks like a gold mine considering where everyone's going to be this race weekend.
And I like this team for those players that haven't used wildcard yet. They're struggling with their budget and they just want to make some moves. This is going to be a low scoring week. So take advantage of those cost cap gains where you can. This team's priced just over 103 million. So it's very affordable for a lot of you that are struggling with your budget. So I would jump into this team and just take those cost cap gains.
Now, you have a very interesting team. I don't think I would be saying to have Sauber as a constructor coming into this 2025 season, but here we are. At 4.5 million, like I said, minimum threshold and looking good for 0.6 million, they're good on the budget. And this differential, I still don't recommend to use. I think I'm still on board the Piastri, McLaren, Mercedes sorts of foundations. However, if you want something different, like it's called the differential, the reason it looks half good is because of the triple McLaren. You basically have the best two assets in the game. You're probably two times Piastri with his form right now, and then Colapinto, again, a must-have, and then Stroll, Hadjar, brilliant. And again, if you can't afford it, you can easily drop Stroll down to a Hulkenberg, and if you can't afford Hulkenberg, you just drop him down to Bortoletto. The only issue as to why I don't think it's one of the teams I would be using is because you're still going to be scoring less points, because Sauber is not going to score you more than 10 points in a race weekend unless something crazy happens. And for that drop in points that you have from Sauber to Mercedes, Lando's not going to cover it. And then you're only gaining around 0.3 million increase in budget coming into this race weekend compared to the Piastri, McLaren, Mercedes teams. So I would only use this team if you are setting up for a limitless play in Monaco.
And that's a great point, Zach. If you're setting up for a limitless play, this could be the right option. I agree with you, though, that I would probably lean away from this if you're just going for a normal week, especially because we don't know which McLaren driver will put up the most points week to week. Lando's capable of getting the fastest lap at any time, and if he lands on pole, he can just run away with any race. So for those of you that are considering a lineup like this, you may still get the 2x option wrong. So I like it if you're setting up limitless, and it's a very big differential if everybody else in your league listens to shows like ours. But otherwise, I'd play a little bit more conservative for Imola.
And then finally, team selection wise, again, it's a slight differential. But as we know, Mercedes haven't been clear cut second best constructor, with Ferrari being good on pit stops and with Red Bull having Max Verstappen. If we come into this race weekend, again, if it's anything like Japan and Verstappen shows a little bit of pace to be able to put it on to that pole position, he will most likely win the race. And that then makes Red Bull as constructor, if Yuki can just finish in the top 10, actually not half bad to look at. And that's why I say just keep an open mind for it. Again, I think it's a little bit too risky when you know, okay, Mercedes, they're going to be good no matter what happens, and you have to pray that Verstappen wins for this team to be good. But again, if you want to risk it and see what happens, go for it.
So for me, if I was looking for a differential, I'd prefer a team like this to something as wild as the Sauber team we looked at a moment ago. And two, this is a track that has had some pretty torrential rain. The race was canceled in 2023 due to flooding, and I don't think I'd trust anybody on the grid more than Max in wet conditions. So weather could lean some more teams into a lineup like this. So, Zach, since we're through 6 races, it is the end of Sector 1 of our Fan Amp picks, and you are the winner for our show. Congratulations. Now, Terry and I have to
Thank you very much.
reset, catch up for the next 18 races. Hopefully, we can get back to you. And congratulations to the winner of the first 6 races, KDP. Now, we're going to reset the leaderboard starting with race number 7 this weekend at Imola. So be sure to go over to the Fan Amp app and compete against Zach, Terry, myself, and players from all over the world. And now moving over to our featured league, the new P1 is a team called Team Beast. Now, this player nailed their chip so far. They used Limitless at Jeddah, no negative in Miami, and they also ran Williams and Haas in Australia at a time where most of our cost caps went backwards, and they gained 1.9 million from the jump. So they've really been running downhill ever since. So it'll be interesting to see if Team Beast can keep this lead through the next few races. We'll be back this Saturday for our next live show, so bring your lineups, bring your questions, and we'll bring the usual shenanigans. Until then, thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you this Saturday.